So we can take those ideas, but if I just go through bit by bit, let's see what we can do.
Okay, Stanley.
Yes.
So we're approaching something like Bach, and we want to add appropriate ornamentation, things that are natural. Is there some kind of system that you could suggest, maybe for a novice? We could give them a good way of looking at this?
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, this is seemingly a very complicated process with, very thick books you can buy full of rules. And there's actually a few very straightforward things we can do that are very easy to understand, that can give us a very big vocabulary of options. That's in the style and that sounds good and gives us an opportunity to just decide, oh, I like the sound of that one, I like the sound of that one. Just a few very simple things. Like, you can go further and further and further, but it's not really that necessary.
What would you say to people who would even dismiss the idea of ornamentation in this particular Baroque style?
Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but fact of the matter is that so many writers during that period wrote in great detail about not just how to play ornaments, but how to add your own, to the extent that it wasn't just possible, it was expected. It was part of the performer's creative role.
There's an expected participation.
It's part of the compositional process. It's part of the notation. Music was written and notated with this in mind. Now, to varying degrees. So we get to Bach, and maybe there's a slight caveat that he notated a lot more in terms of surface decoration of musical figures and in terms of ornament symbols, that perhaps he was cutting the performer out of the picture a little bit.
Right, he's kind of a control freak.
But, well, he's just creative and he's got such great ideas, he's going to put them down, But of course he would have done all kinds of things when he was playing himself. But the real issue is that we have pieces by Bach that he wrote out for different instruments. Quite a lot of them. And whenever he wrote a piece out for a different instrument, he would modify the amount and the complexity of ornamentation so it was appropriate for the instrument. So we decide for ourselves what we think is appropriate for our instrument, and if that suggests we should leave some Bach ornaments out, we'll leave them out. If we feel we can add more, then we add more. We do it in the same way Bach would have done it. We do the kind of thing he would have done. Now that seems like, well, he's a great genius. How dare you? But we just look at some of the simple things he did that are very easy to understand, and we just apply them in the same way he did, and we start getting a taste for it. And with a bit of experience, you start being able to make some pretty reasonable.
You grow your aesthetic judgment.
Absolutely, yeah.
In your muscle.
Yeah. It's not a matter of pretending that we're going to come up with the same thing Bach would have come up with. I mean, that's very unlikely. But we can come up with exactly the same kind of thing he would have come up with.
Well, what would you say, even how people see Bach and a lot of these composers, we think of composers writing melodies and more in a kind of a homophonic textures we're used to. Now, what would you say to, if I said that Bach is almost a kind of an elaborated harmony, and that his music itself is almost a form of ornamentation?
Bach didn't write melodies. Composers in this period didn't write melodies unless they were, actually, even when they're writing arias to be sung, they're not melodies in the way that we think of a melody.
Give us a tune.
An operatic melody is got a nice sweep to it with nice long notes and smoothness and nice leaps and things. Now, you have Lutheran chorales, which are melodies, very simple rhythms to be sung hymn style. They're melodies. But basically in the Baroque period, we have an underlying structure built from the bass, always built from the bass,
right,
upon which an imaginary, not even perhaps stated, correct contrapuntal polyphonic line will be elaborated with figures taken from essentially a pretty standard set of 16th note groupings that actually had their own names. Some of these, Sospiro, Mezzanza, Tirata, you know.
Right.
They're just
little species of mosaic.
And, you know, we have trills, mordants. Well, you know, these are obviously symbols, ornament symbols, but we also, in a sense, these that might ornament a structural note, but the entire underlying structure is being elaborated with these figures all the time. So it's not really a melody as much as it's a series of motifs.
Okay, so like imagine, like the great painters and masters of that time, they would study the human skeleton, right? And then they would paint the muscle groups and the skin over it to make it as real as possible. Is there a way that you could break down like a Bach piece into the skeletal necessity that you're talking about?
Yeah,
and then maybe look at what Bach did, and
I think we can do this in a pretty convincing way, actually, and it's not very difficult. It's not difficult to understand. The ideas are very simple.
So you would just start with the chords, essentially?
Well, let's just take this first cello suite Sarabande.
Okay.
And we'll just play exactly what Bach wrote for the cello, transposed to a nice place on the guitar. So this is what Bach wrote. Okay, that's what he wrote. Obviously, that is not a complete piece of music. Right. The bass line isn't there. Right. It's just the solo line. Yeah. It's the figures are there. The underlying polyphonic upper line, the descant line, and its ornaments and figures are written out.
The opposite of figured bass.
But there's only maybe 3 bass notes in that entire passage, 3 or 4. So
as a guitarist, you could add appropriate things, what you did obviously with your arrangements.
Yeah, so you know, this is not, there's nothing subjective. I mean, we can just look at that and say 100% this is the bass line Bach was imagining, was underneath this, because it's just an absolutely standard.
There's only so many options.
Yeah, it's just an absolutely standard, by the book, thorough bass, fundamental bass progression. So the actual, if I take the figures out and just kind of play a completely consistent bass line, then we're going to get this. Now, there's really no debate about that. That's what Bach was writing on top of.
Right.
It couldn't be anything else. He could have made a more elaborate or chromatic version of that. But that's what it is. It's just very simple, following the very basic rules of common practice harmony, which you harmonize 1 and 5 with root position chords, and you harmonize the rest with inversions. Right. I mean, it's just very simple. You get this beautiful, smooth harmony. And what I did there in terms of, I just kind of played a continuo style 4-part harmony there, trying to incorporate on the top string the basic contour of what seems to be the underlying structural line that Bach is ornamenting on top of and elaborating. We'll look at that in a minute, actually, so we can get into a bit more detail about that. Now, what we have here with this standard, very, very standard chord progression, it couldn't be more standard, is that Bach could use that progression to write any kind of piece.
Right.
He could write a figuration prelude on that.
Right.
It might sound like this.
Right.
And in this case, guess what?
There, Bob's your uncle.
I mean, it's the Well-Tempered Clavier first prelude.
Right.
But he's using that...
Or the first cello suite.
He's using it, in this case, to write a sarabande.
Right, he's plugging in the sarabande.
So he's going to take the sarabande topic, the sarabande idea. Well, what is the sarabande idea? Well, it's based on a dance, and obviously you wouldn't dance to a Bach sarabande, but it's based on the feeling and the quality of movement of a sarabande dance and its steps. And what is that? Well, people say the sarabande is in 3/4 time,
right,
and it has a strong second beat,
right,
which on the surface of it seems true, but I don't feel it or think of it that way at all.
Well, you have a kind of a strange idea of feeling these.
Well, I consider triple meter pieces to only have 2 beats, not 3.
Okay. Right.
They can have 3.
Sure.
But basically, they have long beats and short beats.
Okay.
So it's either going to be let's say it's written in 3/4, so all the details will add up to 3/4 meter, but the actual beats and pulses are either 1, 2. 1, 2. That's the sarabande rhythm. And you can also, in a minuet, you might get 1, 3, 1. That's long, short. And when you get to a cadence, whether it's a sarabande or a minuet or whatever it is, you're very likely to get 1, 2, 3, 1.
Right.
Well, how do we know this? Well, you can dance a sarabande, you can find out how to do it, but you don't need to. Just look at the chord changes.
Okay.
If I just play the chord changes, there's no third beat. Short, long. No beat. Short, long. No pulse. Short, long. Short, long. Short, long. And now, short, long. And now we're going to the cadence. Short, 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 short. Something like that. So this idea of long and short beats, and it's defined by the harmonic changes.
Yeah.
So that's a sarabande topic, and that's basically what he's hearing when he writes his piece.
Okay. And
then he's going to elaborate on top of that to make it more interesting. So if we talk about ornamentation, in that first 8 measures, Bach actually wrote out 3 trill signs.
Okay.
So in this idea of can we emulate what Bach did? Well, let's see what he did. He used a trill 3 times. Every time it's on the second beat. It's on the long beat.
The expressive beat.
The expressive long beat.
Right.
They're always on that beat.
Right.
And they're always based on diatonic half steps.
Right, semitones.
The expressive. So let's just go through that.
Pressure points.
Right? So 1, 2. 1, 2. So I did that because I started to help myself. And now here he does it. Right? 1, 2. Or short, long, short, long. Here's another one coming. So short, long. So it gives us 3 trills. They're always on the long beat, the second beat, and they're always articulating the structural line when it's going to be a half step.
Right.
All right, let's do the same thing ourselves. Let's put some other ones in different places on the second beats that he didn't write. And also, let's do this. We can think of a trill as an elaborated appoggiatura. So,
leaning into the tension.
Here's an appoggiatura. That's an appoggiatura. A trill. It's just kind of a more activated appoggiatura. So in a lot of cases, we can interchange these. I'll play Bach's original, but I'll do appoggiaturas instead of trills. Let's do 4 measures. So we can do that. But I'll do this again, and now all I'm going to do is add either a appoggiatura or a trill on second beats.
Right.
And I might use Bach's trills as written, or I might swap them out for appoggiaturas. You just use your judgment. It's like, I just did an appoggiatura. If I do another one, that might be boring. You just have to use your judgment. But anyway, we already now have an idea that we can do the same thing Bach did. We can put an ornament on the second beat of the Sarabande, which is the defining long beat of the Sarabande.
To that.
We're stressing that beat in an elegant way. And we can do it with a trill, or an appoggiatura, resolved by a trill, this kind of thing. So now we get something like this. So,
really putting the clothing on the...
I think I can say with a high degree of confidence that I didn't do anything there that isn't the kind of thing that Bach would have routinely done.
Right.
Now, he would undoubtedly be more inventive and do crazier things.
Well, are there other kind of, I'm sure there's all kinds of ornaments. They have vocabulary for all kinds of things.
There are tons. With all kinds of weird names, Doppelbrook, Vorschlag, Proudtriller, Springer, Schmackenspiegel. I mean, there's millions. But the base, we don't need necessarily to do all of, we don't need to do all of those. I mean, a trill, a mordant, a short appoggiatura, a long appoggiatura already gives us so many options, slides, of course.
Not literal slides, like guitar sticks.
So,
joining the dots together. Right?
Like if you did this, the slide would be it's that little run up. Bach often wrote those out in full in 30-second notes.
Right.
Yeah. So we can add slides. Obviously you can analyze Bach's music and look at where does he use slides? Where does he use mordants? Well, he uses mordants on.
So a lot of the pieces
coming from below, uses trills coming from above, and
so in a lot of those slow pieces, when you see all those 30-second notes, they're not just the standard piece. They're actually him writing out.
It's a written out ornament,
right?
Yeah. I guess he didn't have a sign for a slide,
right.
Or maybe he wanted it to be played in a slightly more measured way,
right?
A symbol, gives you a lot of rhythmic freedom to decide how you're going to interpret it. Yeah, so just with those very straightforward ideas of a trill and an appoggiatura, which are essentially the same thing, the idea that they can go on the second beat, the strong long beat of the Sarabande, and that they sound great when they articulate half steps.
Yeah.
The
half.
We already have a whole world. Now, another thing we can do, which is interesting, is to look at these figures and written out little things that Bach has already elaborated his underlying, partimento line, whatever we want to call it. Let's look what he did. So I'll just let's take a few measures at a time and have a listen. So I'll play what I believe to be his structural line and the bass, and then we'll see what he did. All right, what he did was this. What is he doing there? He's adding a very stock figure. So it's a measured, written out elaboration.
Yeah.
And then he's just going by step down to there. And now we have this, actually it's a very nice moment when he goes to he just reinforces, that 4 chord, which normally the 4th scale degree would be harmonized by an inverted chord. So to get away with the kind of bass major 4 chord, which is not used very often, by tonicizing It's very beautiful. So there, let's listen to that, just that little bit. We have, how does he elaborate that? He just wrote that out for us. Right. Then we have 3, 1, 2. How does he elaborate that? Well, that's the same figure as the earlier one. It's a note and a leap and move away. So passing again, and then another same figure. Da, di, ya, da, da. And that move is actually, the underlying line would be this. But he elaborates it out like this. It takes him that long to get there. And we could go on like this. Well, if we just move to the cadence, he now uses a string of musical figures. So we can, this is getting a little bit more involved, but we can elaborate the existing figures even a little more, or we can add some of our own. And the figures are things like note, leap, and moving by step, or leap, move by step, or a tirata, or all by step, or something like this. Right. For example, 1, 2, 1, 2. So we can take those ideas, but if I just go through bit by bit, let's see what we can do. Go too far. Yeah, so that's basically, we've looked at two types of kind of elaborating, basically adding trills or appoggiaturas in an interchangeable fashion and using them in an identical fashion. Yeah. The question is, we decide what we think sounds good to us. Right. And that's a matter of opinion and judgment and subjectivity, but
if it's too similar, it'll get boring.
You don't want things to become predictable,
right?
So that they lose their effect,
right?
And there are some issues of style. French. This is French style music, which is very rhythmic and fiddly,
florid.
And twiddly, and kind of flamboyant and nonchalant and arrogant almost.
Right.
You can use different words to describe these feelings, but if we think of a more traditional German style Sarabande aria, something that Handel would do. That's a Sarabande aria in Sarabande style.
Teutonic stability.
It's much smoother.
Right.
So there are issues of style, and that's just a matter of playing and listening to music and getting a taste for some of it, But, it just comes down to having some options.
Yeah.
And just deciding what you think sounds good at a particular point, you know. You don't, you know, I mean, when I play in concerts, I just improvise a lot of the ornaments. Nothing crazy, but it's like, I think I'll do an appoggiatura here.
Right.
You know.
And I hear you sometimes you'll approach notes. I like to do this too. You know, you come up into it. You call it a division, right?
Kind of a lead in.
You kind of approach an important note.
So if we did this, then I might approach that with something
beautiful
to set it up, or something like this, much more elaborate. I might do this. So they're kind of Italian style, I suppose, a little bit. But yeah, they're kind of, in the Renaissance music, we call those divisions. I don't really know what you call them in.
Yeah, like in a dial-in piece where you'd have this kind of the simple declaration of the idea, and then next he would do it with, in a fancier way, with more lines.
So, I think just with these few ideas, now the figures and stuff is more involved, you know, but taking trills and appoggiaturas, this is a very straightforward thing.
Right.
And just experimenting and picking the things that sound good.
Right.
And if you put them in the right place, if you look for the half steps, you look for the strong beats, they're always going to sound good.
Yeah.
They're never going to sound bad. The only mistake you can make is to keep doing it in the same way and it becomes boring.
Right.
Of course, you can be charged of fiddling with Bach's music. Well, unfortunately, this Sarabande isn't a piece of music.
Right.
I mean, it is on a cello, which is like a dog walking on two legs.
Right, right.
You know.
Right.
And the idiom of the cello disguises all the things that are missing musically, but as soon as you play this on any other instrument other than a single line one, you're not dealing with a piece of music anymore.
Right.
This is not a piece of music.
It's like a shorthand.
So where's it gone?
It's like shorthand, right?
So, and if you don't fix that, if you don't recreate Bach's structural line that he's completely aware of, if you don't recreate that, I'm sorry, you're not playing his music.
Right.
You're really just brutalizing it and doing something very bizarre.
Right.
You know. So you know.
So there's.
But when you start messing with a lot of figures, well, maybe you are going too far. I don't know, but it's just for each of us to decide what we want to do.
But in general, there's an invitation to participate in this music.
Well, this is one of the audience. This is one of the creative aspects that a performer has at their disposal when you play this kind of music.
Yeah.
You know, and performers were expected to know how to do this. And not that difficult, really.
Right.
You know, and we know that Bach, as I mentioned earlier, if he wrote this for the lute, he's going to add tons more ornament signs.
Yeah.
You know, if he played it on the harpsichord or the clavichord, and we know that he played these kinds of pieces at home, because his son talked about it, saying it, adding whatever he felt he wanted to by way of harmony, just as he felt. Right. You know, and again, it's not that we're suggesting we can match Bach or write Bach. Obviously, he would have come up with always a better thing than I can come up with. But I can do exactly the kind of thing you would have done.
Right.
Without any fear at all that I'm doing something inappropriate.
You think when you see a long trill in a harpsichord piece, for instance, do you ever think of the trill as being just a elongated note, almost like a vibrato?
This is absolutely another aspect.
You know, because they can't hold it.
If you have a long note on a harpsichord, it dies, and it's just you're just sitting there doing nothing.
Right.
So a trill becomes
but is that why?
Becomes a way to it's like a
extreme vibrato.
Well, in the Baroque guitar, they wrote out vibrato as an ornament.
Okay.
And if you read the instructions of how to play it, you're supposed to do the fastest, widest, most grotesque thing you can.
Really?
Vigorous, you know. It's like, and it's like, what the?
Like Stevie Ray Vaughan.
But it's almost like a trill, you know. It's very straight. Right. You know, I mean, I'm not making that up.
Yeah. It's in
personally, I've never been able to get it into my system to actually do it in a piece. But
isn't there a call for that in the Vice piece, the tombeau?
There is.
Monsieur Comte de Logis.
With the rhetorical things there, yeah. But it's also in Gasper Sand's instructions, you know.
So do you think that that's related to why Bach wrote these ornamental, you know, trills over the long beats? It's just or is it to do with the expressive?
Well, if Bach was
tension?
writing a chorale using this scheme, this schemata.
Yeah.
Schema. What's the plural? Schemata or schema? Anyway, you know, if Bach is taking this standard chord progression to write, let's say, a chorale for a cantata, then he's not going to do all these twiddles and trills. Right. He's going to have beautiful connecting lines. But if he's writing an instrumental piece, that's probably not going to be interesting enough.
Right.
And if he's writing in a certain style, in this case he's writing French music, well, one of the characteristics of French music, apart from the dance meters, which we already talk about having only 2 beats and not 3, but one of the characteristics of French music is it's very, very ornate on the surface.
Right.
Very ornate.
A certain kind of sensibility that can't, you know, when you think about Louis the 14th.
I don't like it, you know. So
this florid
the definition of the word Baroque is a Portuguese word that means a kind of flawed, misshapen, malformed pearl.
Right.
And I don't like that image when you're talking about art.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, if we look at a Baroque painting, and especially as it gets to Rococo painting, but we look at Baroque painting, Baroque architecture, it's very ornate.
Right.
Very ornate, very decorative. And the music is also that way. Now, Bach gives us an awful lot of information. Many composers give us just the bare bones.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have to find, we introduce the detail ourselves.
Right.
You know.
If we even think of like the end of a violin, the scroll of a violin,
it's very Baroque, isn't it?
It is a Baroque gesture. Isn't
and the Baroque is the violin is a Baroque instrument.
Right, exactly.
It was the viol before that.
Right.
But the violin, the actual fast, articulate, expressive instrument, is a Baroque invention. And it's got that ornate scroll. And even Baroque guitars and lutes have those incredibly decorative paper things, you know.
Yeah.
And often they had embedded
and when you say of invention too,
ivory and things like
just
this.
The word invention seems to be very linked with the idea of Baroque, the inventiveness, the searching for patterns, intricacy and variation and constant extrapolating.
But there is the idea of constantly ongoing invention. In a compositional sense, it's using a subject and treating it to all the standard moves.
Yeah.
So when Bach, I mean, again, his son told us this, when he saw a subject, a fugue subject, he just knew all the possible things that could be done with that. That was his expertise.
Yeah.
He knew if it could go against itself, in which keys, could it go backward against itself. He knew all those things. He had such a command of intervals.
Yeah.
And he knew, you know, what can you do? Could you play it twice as fast against a version that's at the same speed?
Yeah.
That's what he means by an invention. It's a compositional theme, if you like, or something,
DNA.
You know. But then there's also this idea of the unfolding of a piece, which you find in his figurations, whether it's just streams of 16th notes with the constantly changing figures, the invention, the inventiveness, and the constant invention of changing where the accents are and what the shapes are.
Well, he kind of saw himself as kind of a scientist of sorts too, kind of an explorer.
I'm sure he saw music as a scientific subject, but he also saw it as a spiritual one.
Yeah.